It's my pleasure to introduce everyone to Brian Cohn, who's going to be talking about aligning requirements, marrying concepts from Kano, MoSCoW, and modularity. So take it away, Brian.
All right. Well, thank you everybody this morning and welcome. I appreciate everybody getting up on a Saturday morning for this. And as Ed said, we want to talk a little bit about how to manage requirements and create them, and think about how to use these models from Kano and MoSCoW, and how that all changes when we have modular products. A little bit about me and my company. We have a small firm of 3 partners that are working to help people improve the return on their product development investments through investments, elements to accelerate innovation, and working on project success. And for me, I've been doing this for about 35 years in project and portfolio management, and spent the last 7 years working at a fairly large Danish company as a coach and consultant on product development. And through the years, taken all kinds of roles from a design engineer to project management, product management, application engineering, helped build a production line, brand new production capability online once, and very excited to be here to talk today. And we're going to sort of go through 5 elements here. Where in the world the requirements come from. We've probably had lots of talks, lots of experience with that. A little bit about this Kano Model, which tells us a little bit how to categorize requirements. MoSCoW, which really helps us prioritize, and then what happens when products are modular or configurable, because that can throw some huge monkey wrenches into the adventure. And Ed, we haven't talked about this in advance, but if there seem to be pertinent questions cropping up, please feel free to sort of break in and feed them to me as we go along, so we can try to answer them in real time as we get to them. So a little bit about how did I get in to start thinking about this. The company that I've spent most of the last decade at, called Danfoss, makes a lot of hydraulic and control and user interface equipment for people that do products that go into agriculture and construction, so people like Caterpillar, John Deere, like that. And we succeed in the market by providing some economy of scale that our customers have. Our customers sort of like to think of themselves as automotive-like, but they don't have the volumes. They can't justify a product just for them. And so one of the products that was developed a few years ago was a new display to put in there, and this very configurable product was a base unit, and you can see different versions with different buttons and maybe touch screens or not touch screens. And so it's like, how do we define the requirements for that? Because it gets messy. Another one where we did a joystick, and here you can see the different kinds of vehicles it goes in. And I think the last I heard, just given the number of possible handles and outputs and grip functions, there's something like 1 million different different configurations that were theoretically possible on this. And so how do you specify the 1 million? And one of the things that we want to make sure that we don't do in this process is create this ultimate Swiss Army knife that theoretically does everything but doesn't work for anybody. And this is a place where these ideas of being very specific about what goes in a core product, what goes into different modules, what goes into different variants, can be extraordinarily helpful. And so as we do this, we start thinking about where do requirements start from. And I'm going to talk here like I know about something, and be honest, it's a little bit of a stretch, but I wanted to pick a kind of a product to think about through this presentation that people could relate to. And you think about, I'm in the market to get a new monitor for my computer. And one could, if one was in the process of creating them, one might think of segmenting sort of the product categories into, is it, big, 25, 28 inches, maybe even bigger to put up on the wall? Is it in the sort of 21 to 22 inch range to do that? And, maybe we're looking at, these days HD versus 4K resolution versus when I started, we were happy when we had, it was a 320 by 240 resolution screen back in the early days. And it's always important as we're thinking to start is, what game am I playing here? And if you're trying to serve me as a customer, I'm going to call it in the small size, and maybe, at least what I have on my desk today is high definition resolution, but maybe I want to go up to something a little bit higher. And once we've decided what game we're playing in, then we have to say, how do I stand out from the competition in this game space? And here I've sort of simplified this and thinking about, okay, I've decided it's a 21-ish inch and it's going to be a 4K resolution, and what other parameters might there be that would separate us? And here we've just sort of picked on two, is that we might pick on viewing angle. Is it wide or small? And where do we want to sit for that product? Is it something that can only be used in landscape mode? Can I flip it to portrait? There might be other things, contrast ratio, where there's a USB hub, and there's probably all kinds of other things that help separate out. But some of this I might even think about, if I'm creating these, can I create a modular product so that I could maybe satisfy both this, segment D with at 4K resolution and high definition within some kind of a framework, or maybe it's the resolution that drives it and I can make different sizes. But that's where it's really important to decide what game you're playing in, and then how you want to stand out relative to the competition. And in that, we talked about the stuff that's just sort of the musts and the really things that are absolutely required. And this gets us into this Kano model. And here we can think of our requirements as fitting into three broad camps. We have basic needs. These are things that customers just expect. If you don't have it, you're not likely to be successful in the market. So if, again, in this world of monitors, maybe it has to have a Visa mount on the back so I can put it on a stand, or maybe that it has to be able to sit on a desk by itself. The resolution in this class, I've picked this, is a basic need. So these are things that we expect, and we disqualify the product if it doesn't have those things in it. So it's an easy, and it's something that we have to do well. At the other end the next in line are these things we may call one-dimensional performance, and things where as you improve the performance on some, as it's generally something quantifiable as opposed to an attribute. So things like the viewing angle, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The contrast ratio, the brightness of my display would fit into this. And we need to get into this, what we call zone of indifference. We need to get into that to be able to play in the game, and then decide which view we want to get up here into this higher performance to provide higher satisfaction and fulfillment for this particular market segment. And then finally, we have what we would call delighters. These are little extra things in there that are maybe bonus features that tip you over the edge. I'm looking at two different things, and maybe they're the same. Hopefully they're close to the same cost, and say, oh, it would be nice if I had a USB hub built into this so that I could get one more piece of junk off of my desk. And so, this is something we want to put in with some sort of a wow factor in our product. And as we're talking about requirements, when we're discussing whether something's in or something's out, it's really good to ask the question, how does the customer perceive this? Is this something that is this really core basic need that we must have in the product to even be considered? Is it something that if we can enhance performance becomes um, something that would delight, or is this just an added feature that will help bring people over the edge?
Hey, Brian, a
Yes,
question just came in asking
sure.
for more description about zone of indifference.
Okay. So the zone of indifference is a place where if, you know, you don't have to have identical performance for people to consider them equivalent. So for example, here, if we think about the viewing angle of a monitor, whether it's 120 or 130 degrees, it's not going to sway people's decisions. You need to get into that to even be considered if you're below that. So if we want relatively wide again in this, and we had 30-degree viewability of the screen, would be down here outside, below that zone of indifference, and we'd be dissatisfied. But here, it's just that there isn't one spot of success. For most parameters, there's a range in which people are not would accept. Okay. Any other questions coming in, Ed?
Um, so the follow-up question to that is, your remaining stories / features need to be in that box?
I think it's more about, as long that if you have two things that are in the box, even though one maybe looks a little bit higher unsatisfied or dissatisfied or fulfilled or not fulfilled or well fulfilled, your customer is likely to not tell the difference. And there will be lots of things, for the most part, and we'll get to it later as we talk here, is that all of our must-haves need to be in that box, because if we don't get in there, we probably don't have any success in the market. We need a few things that are outside of that box that are better fulfilled and more satisfied. Those are those wow factors. That's our basis of competition. That becomes why people choose us instead of the competition.
Okay.
Okay. Great questions. And there's sort of a model for thinking about how do I think about these things and how can I tell kind of which category it goes in. And here, and you think about it, obviously we want to ask customers about this, and you take something, and here I've just sort of picked an HDMI part example. If it's present, I expect that. If it's not present, well, I'm really unhappy. And when you have that kind of combination, we get into a basic need. If we have something, it rotates between portrait and landscape. If it's not, okay, I can live with that, but oh, hey, I really like that. That becomes a delighter. And we want an attribute like, if I'm really neutral on it, whether it's there or not there, then it's indifferent and probably shouldn't be in your requirements. And then we look at the contrast ratio, and we can say, if it's below something, I dislike it, which means it doesn't satisfy anybody. As we get better, if we don't have that, I dislike it. If I do it, maybe I expect it, and higher, or I really like it. That's sort of how we would identify something as being a one-dimensional feature or one-dimensional attribute or requirement. As we look at this, is one other thing, is that over time, things that used to be delighters become basic needs. And so again, if we think about monitors, in my lifetime, we said we've gone from that, 320 by 240 that could, barely show 80 characters of courier text across the screen, and we were thrilled in 1981. If I saw that today, I would hope that it's in an old museum. And as we go up, and just in general, everything advances, and these things that used to be delighters start becoming expected. the level of performance that's considered satisfactory gets you into that zone of indifference raises over the years. We've certainly seen in monitors, the number of the color gamut, how much of the whole color spectrum can they display has grown tremendously over the years. Orange used to be I'm looking at this, I don't know if you can see it on my screen, but orange used to be a really tough color, and now as you can see, the displays can show that very well. So it's important to look at this every time you're redesigning and updating your product, because it can change a lot. I'm going to switch gears here and talk about a different model known as MoSCoW, or must, should, could, won't. And this becomes a model for deciding what's in your product, what direction you give to the customer, what you give to the design team to work on. And this is a model that I think plays a little bit better in a hardware world than it does in a software world, where we need to work on all of our requirements in parallel. If we have a much more software-related world, we can work them one at a time, then we can use other prioritizing and work on the most valuable features first. But again, as I'm thinking about this monitor, I've got a set of basic requirements. We talked about, some screen angle, a differentiator might be, 2 or 3 HDMI inputs, so that would help people out. It's something that is your core of what we want to do to deliver our business case and win in our market segment. We're not going to take over the entire world. We're going to take over the category and the segment that we wanted to talk about. We have then should haves, things that are important requirements. They add some customer value. Often they extend the product to allow us to reach additional segments. But if we couldn't design them into the product, that would be okay. Even, more, sort of, further away from the must-haves are these coulds, niceties, maybe some options, things that push the customer a little bit further over the edge, things that we would only put in if we could essentially do them for free, generally, often both in terms of development time and product cost. And probably the most important category is the things that we agree are not going to be part of the product, because it's really easy. I've been in a number of talks over the last few days, and there's always somebody from sales saying this customer needs that, and you end up putting in a lot of things that are for that 3 and 4 sigma customer, which are not necessarily, which might add cost, add risk, and move you away from your core focus to reach the market that you want to reach. And you might ask the question, how do we look at that? And again, if we're in this sort of traditional agile and software world, these must-have, this is sort of upside down of priority. We would start working from the bottom up and then stop or release when somebody says, okay, that's enough, and maybe add those later. When we're working in a more hardware world where we have to sort of make decisions on the requirements, work them together, this is a place where we ask the team to try to start designing for all the coulds and the shoulds and the must-haves, but that they have the authority, at least on the coulds and the shoulds, to remove those from the product. They have to inform everybody, but they really have the ability to remove them in order to meet other project goals like project cost, project time, and product cost. And it's really important to have some sort of a framework for deciding which category these fit into. And so what we do and what we recommend is looking at each of these features or feature levels and look at their impact on the performance of the product, its attractiveness in the market, if you will, what impact it has on our profit. Does it allow us to charge a higher price? Does it allow us to sell more? We also want to say, what is the impact on product cost? And how much effort in it is it? And those things, and in this case, it's a little bit of a perverse scale because the higher numbers are more favorable, not more. So a higher number on cost really means the cost is lower. And so, you know, 5 is less cost. And here, if we look at these things like our 2001 aspect, I mean, it's important for performance, it's important for our profit, it's moderate effort, and it's a moderate impact on the product cost. And as we go higher and higher in contrast ratio, it's adding more effort, and so, you know, we might not want to do it. And there could be things here that we would just decide are out. Maybe if we had looked at this and the 20,000 to 1 contrast ratio was, added a lot of cost. We've got a 1 on here. We would have moved that into the won't category. But it's really important to have this discussion with the product, with both the market-facing people in your organization, your engineering, and even all the way into operations to be able to make these decisions of where do things belong in this must, should, could framework or won't. And if we, sort of put this together and take what we had on the last slide, hopefully these were consistent. Maybe they're not quite. We said we must have that HDMI port. We wanted to have a relatively high contrast ratio. If we can get higher, great, but we're not going to do it. And we just said, and maybe we decided that rotating it was too expensive, and we said, no, we're just not going to do that. So we have this very simple matrix of musts, shoulds, and coulds. And then as we get into, and switching gears a little bit, actually just sort of ask Ed, any questions have come in on the must, should, coulds?
There was a question about from Kano. The question was, if can basic needs in Kano become delighters over time? For example,
go ahead.
For example, air travel, free bag check used to be expected, but now is a delighter.
Oh, it's quite rare. Generally, it's that things you expect, things that were delighters become expected, and I think that's a very unusual situation.
Yeah, yeah. And there's another question here. Is this the same as Rice model analysis?
I'm not familiar with the Rice model.
Nor I. So maybe we can get some more.
Yeah, that sounds like a great thing for a Slack conversation after the talk.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to switch gears here and talk about, I think we talked very briefly about why we have configurable products. And again, it's this idea of being able to be able to serve multiple segments. If we're going back to that joystick, different machines need different sets of functionality. They operate, and some people like to do it with their hands this way, and some it's better if their hands are vertical. And so we have those things. And it gets us into a situation, if we just have that standard must, should, could model, we get really confused really quickly about what do I need to have in some core or basic model? What do I want to make available as a variant? And here, we go through the same analysis, but we can get to these things and say, and here I'm looking at this, we decided in the previous one, we decided the base product wasn't going to be rotatable, but we want to have a variant where we can rotate it between landscape and portrait. And we want to have and it would be nice if we can do it if it doesn't add costs, especially add cost to the most basic version, to the base model, to be able to put a USB hub in later. We would like to, if we can, here in this case, or maybe in this, it'd be nice to be able to turn this into a touchscreen. And so, but you can see it's very clear to describe what you want to have as variance separately from what you want to have in the base product to make it clear to the organization and have those goals be clear. The last piece in sort of thinking about this is that sometimes and quite often these things in variance can be interdependent, or you can choose to make them interdependent. It's probably the place you see that most is in car shopping, is that you can get a base model. You say, okay, I'd like to upgrade the stereo, but I don't want the cashmere floor mats. But they choose to bundle those together in their wisdom. And from an operation standpoint, where of course we know the old sort of line that heaven for a salesperson is they can get exactly the configuration that they want, and which is hell for operations, and heaven for operations is everybody in the world buys the exact same SKU, and we have to find some balance. So often bundling things that you want in variance into maybe high, medium, and low performance. I think Craftsman Tools used to do it with their good, better, best kind of product lines. And that mindset is really important to looking at your requirements and coming out of your requirements definition, maybe with a roadmap, and not just the kinds of things you want to have in variance, but maybe even what specific variance will be. Wrapping this up, I think we all see challenges in organizing product requirements, and it can get messy. We can confuse the organization, and we really have these two models that can be very powerful for doing that. The Kano model, so we can think about, where does this fit? Is this a basic need? Are we getting ourselves in the performance into that basic need, into that we sometimes call qualifying level of performance, or are we putting some small number of delighters in to sway the purchasing decision? Giving this clear direction to the development team, what they absolutely positively need to deliver versus what it would be nice to have versus don't even think about it. Because engineers, I run into two different classes of engineers. One is you have to twist their arm to do anything beyond the must because they want to keep the cost down. And the ones that just go after where there's a shiny object over here and over here, oh, that would be cool to add, that would be cool to add. And so we really want to be clear about what we won't put into the product. And then, of course, you just talk about this idea of configurability or variance, and being very clear in your organization of your requirements about what goes in a core product versus what goes in some variant or special configuration of it. So that's what I had for today. Would love additional questions, would love to connect with people who want to talk more about this topic. And I'd just like to thank everybody for your time this morning. I hope it's morning. I suspect it's morning for most people, and giving up a Saturday for this discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian. That was a really good talk. A lot of good information there, and I liked your examples a lot. I'm looking at the Zoom chat right now. I don't see any new questions that have come in, but we still have a couple minutes left. I'll just.
Sure.
I have a question.
Thanks,
Okay,
Steve.
go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, it's Steve Jambor. So my question is, I've always loved the Kano model, but I've never understood what the survey instrument looks like. So how do you get from, how do you get the information in a proper order so that you can place it into that Kano model?
The way that we start that process is often doing a survey of competitive products and their performance levels. And that generally helps you understand, based on what the rest of the market is doing, what that basic need is. And then discovering the meaningful differentiators is a whole art unto itself, and all kinds of different customer insight methods can be used to get that. One thing that we often use in our world to understand that is something that we call idea shopping. We go to customers, we give them options to pick things, often with some kind of pricing associated with that. Generally fictitious numbers. We do it in bitcoins or story points or something. So they don't think that this is about how much extra they'd really pay, to gauge the extent to which something is a delighter that would sway their decision or get them to pay a little extra. Does that help, Steve?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So we have just a couple minutes left. I'll just remind folks that, we do have a Slack channel to continue this discussion. And there's also the Wonder Me. Are you planning to go there, Brian?
I would be happy to go there. I'll be honest, I haven't quite figured all of that out yet, but if there's a place set up for this, I'll take a couple minutes, figure out and get in there. But
yeah, it's on the participant website, and there's a link to it, and it's pretty straightforward, but
Yep. So I will jump there after this and be happy to continue the conversation with anyone who's interested.
And someone asked for the slides. Will you provide that in the Slack channel?
I have given them to the Product Camp Online people, and I assume that they will take care of the magic of putting it into the Slack channel.
Okay. All right. Great. And just a reminder to everyone to please fill out the surveys. There's a link to that on our site as well. And I just want to thank Brian Cohn again for a great presentation. Thank you. Have a great day.
Yep. I'd like to thank a couple of people who are on the call who have contributed to my thinking. I see Bill Farmer on here, and I think Steve Stuckey, both there helped a lot in sort of developing this model from a class we did a few weeks ago.
Okay, awesome.
All right. Thank you.